There's a curious behavior that many men carry without realizing it. The constant need to explain everything they do. They explain their decisions, justify their choices, ask for approval even before acting. It seems polite, almost noble. But there's a silent problem in it. Each excessive explanation communicates an invisible message. I need you to accept my decisions. And the moment that happens, something subtle changes in the power dynamic. Because, as Machiavelli observed, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, reveals an uncomfortable truth. Those who constantly explain themselves end up surrendering their authority into the hands of others. Now, think calmly. Observe the people who truly wield influence, leaders, strategists, men who seem to carry a presence that's hard to ignore. They don't spend all their time trying to justify every action. They decide and act. This doesn't mean arrogance, but inner mastery. Machiavelli understood something that many people still ignore. The perception of power begins when you demonstrate that you don't depend on everyone's approval. That's why he talks so much about virtù and fortuna, about understanding human nature and making decisions based on real human nature. Because whether we like it or not, people respect those who demonstrate autonomy. And curiously, when someone stops begging for acceptance, something unexpected happens. The environment begins to treat them differently. And here's the most intriguing part of all. Most men believe that respect comes from pleasing, explaining, and convincing. But Machiavelli had already perceived something much deeper. Often, respect is born when you simply stop justifying your existence, when you learn to speak less, act with intention, and use silence as a tool. At that moment, something changes in people's perception. Some begin to respect more, others become cautious, and some even begin to fear crossing certain boundaries. The question is, what really happens when a man abandons the need to explain his actions and begins to act with a strategic posture? If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul. An invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. From a very young age, almost without realizing it, man is trained to seek approval. First from his parents, then from his teachers, later from his work colleagues, friends, and even people he barely knows. It seems harmless, almost polite, but there is a silent trap there. When someone learns that they need to please in order to be accepted, they begin to adjust their personality to fit the expectations of others. And little by little, without noticing, they stop acting with virtù and fortuna and begin to react only to the environment. Notice common situations. The employee who agrees with everything the boss says, even when they know the decision is bad. The friend who laughs at jokes they don't even find funny. Or the man who completely changes his behavior to be accepted in a certain group. This is not just social adaptation, it's psychological conditioning. And as Machiavelli already observed, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding how people really behave. Those who live trying to please become predictable, and those who are predictable sooner or later become manipulable. When someone relies on the approval of others to feel secure, they end up giving up something very valuable, control over their own demeanor. Imagine a simple scenario. Two men enter a meeting. One of them speaks his mind calmly, without seeming desperate to please. The other carefully measures each word, trying to ensure everyone likes him. Which one conveys more authority? It's almost instinctive to notice. The first seems more solid, more secure. The second seems fragile, not because he is weak, but because he demonstrates a dependence on the reaction of others. And here enters a principle that has spanned centuries since Machiavelli: decisions based on real human nature. People respect those who demonstrate emotional autonomy, not those who beg for acceptance. This doesn't mean being rude or arrogant, it means not compromising your inner self. After all, those who desperately need to be loved usually end up merely tolerated. And the curious thing is that often this search for approval begins with good intentions, to be polite, to be liked, to be seen as someone good. But without realizing it, the man begins to live within what Machiavelli would call the appearance of virtue, shaping his image to please the public. Now consider something interesting. Those who constantly seek approval reveal their weaknesses without realizing it. When someone asks 1,000 times, "Did you like it?" or "What did you think of me?" they are revealing something that others quickly pick up on: insecurity. And human nature, whether we like it or not, tends to test what it perceives as vulnerable. Think of competitive environments like business, politics, or leadership. Those who demonstrate dependence on the acceptance of others end up being pressured, tested, or ignored. It's not pure malice, it's human dynamic. The calculated use of force, a concept so often discussed by Machiavelli, often begins precisely in psychological posture. Men who constantly seek approval rarely build real authority because their energy is focused on pleasing, not on acting. And when someone notices this, they understand that they can guide that behavior. That's why strategic leaders cultivate constant adaptability, but never emotional submission. They understand that pleasing everyone is impossible, and trying to do so is an elegant way to lose respect. And when a man begins to perceive this trap, an inevitable question arises. If pleasing doesn't generate true respect, then what posture truly generates authority? There's an age-old question that spans centuries and still baffles many. Is it better to be loved or feared? When Machiavelli analyzed human nature in its rawest form, he wasn't interested in romantic ideals of leadership. He observed reality as it is, not as we would like it to be. And within this politics guided by reality, not by ideals, he perceived something simple, almost uncomfortable. People's love is volatile. It depends on mood, convenience, interest, and circumstance. Today, someone admires you. Tomorrow, the same person may abandon you if it suits them. Intelligent fear, on the other hand, creates clear boundaries. It's not terror, it's not brutality, nor abuse. It's an awareness of consequence. When someone understands that there is a line that should not be crossed, respect arises. That's why Machiavelli said something that many people misinterpret. It's better to be feared than loved, provided you know how to avoid being hated. It seems paradoxical, but in practice it's extremely strategic. Observe how this works in everyday life. Think of two managers within a company. One of them wants to be liked by everyone. He avoids confrontations, accepts delays, tolerates unproductive behavior, and tries to maintain harmony at all costs. Initially, everyone likes him. But over time, something curious happens. People begin to abuse this attitude. Deadlines are ignored, responsibilities are passed over, and ultimately, no one really respects his decisions. Now imagine another manager. He is polite but firm. He doesn't raise his voice unnecessarily, doesn't seek to intimidate, but makes it clear that certain lines cannot be crossed. If someone fails repeatedly, there are consequences. This type of attitude conveys something powerful: predictability of limits. and clear limits create respect. Here comes the concept of the calculated use of force, something Machiavelli described as essential for those who want to maintain authority. It's not about constant aggression, but about knowing exactly when to act and when to simply observe. Another interesting point is that those who are overly dependent on being loved end up becoming hostages to the opinions of others. Imagine someone who needs everyone to like them to feel secure. Every criticism becomes a threat. Every disapproval becomes an emotional crisis. This makes them manipulable because anyone can use approval or rejection as a tool for control. The man who understands virtù and fortuna acts differently. He knows he can't control everyone's opinion, but he can control his posture. He makes decisions based on real human nature, not on the expectation of being admired. This creates a different presence. It's not arrogance, it's not extreme coldness, it's psychological stability. Interestingly, this posture often ends up generating more admiration than the constant search for approval. Because people trust more those who demonstrate emotional autonomy. And when someone realizes you're not desperate to please, something changes in the dynamics of the relationship. Some begin to respect you, others become cautious, and some even try to test your limits, which reveals an even deeper point that many ignore. The emotions you reveal can become tools in the hands of others, and that's where the next move in this strategy begins. There's something few people admit out loud, but any attentive observer quickly notices unfiltered emotions can become tools in the hands of others, not because everyone is a cold manipulator, but because human nature responds to signs of vulnerability. Machiavelli, when analyzing political and social behavior, always emphasized the importance of understanding real human nature, not its idealized version. And in this reality, feelings like neediness, excessive fear of rejection, or a constant need for validation end up revealing pressure points. Think about how many times someone overshares their insecurities hoping for empathy, and sometime later realizes that it was used against them in an argument, a professional dispute, or even a personal relationship. This doesn't mean that feeling is weakness. The problem isn't having emotions. The problem is not knowing when to reveal them. Those who live emotionally exposed end up offering others a complete map of their fragilities. Imagine a competitive work environment. One employee constantly expresses anxiety about losing their job, shows insecurity about their competence, and constantly seeks validation. Another employee also feels pressure but maintains a stable demeanor. They work, observe, learn, and speak only when necessary. Which one do you think will be seen as more trustworthy to take on responsibility? In practice, people tend to trust more those who demonstrate emotional stability. This happens because leadership and authority are deeply linked to the perception of internal control. Machiavelli understood this very well when he spoke of virtù and fortuna, the ability to act with self-control even when circumstances change. And here's something important. It's not about hiding feelings all the time, but about understanding the context. In competitive environments, those who reveal everything they feel end up losing strategic power. That's why leaders, strategists, and negotiators develop a specific skill, talking less about emotions and more about actions. Another interesting point is that emotional weakness often creates invisible submission. When someone is constantly afraid of losing approval, they end up giving in to situations they shouldn't. They accept unfair tasks, tolerate disrespect, and avoid necessary confrontations. Gradually, their posture communicates something silent. My limit is flexible, and people notice this quickly. Therefore, decisions based on real human nature require emotional self-control. It's not absolute coldness, but constant adaptability. Knowing when to speak, when to be silent, and when to simply observe. This type of posture begins to completely change the dynamics of interactions, because when someone realizes that you don't react impulsively, don't beg for acceptance, and don't expose every emotion, a feeling of uncertainty arises, and uncertainty alters the behavior of the people around you. Some become cautious, others begin to respect your limits more, and others simply can no longer predict your reactions. It is at this point that one of the most underestimated tools of personal power emerges: calculated indifference. There's a type of strength that almost no one teaches, but it completely changes how people relate to you. Calculated indifference. It's not empty coldness, nor theatrical arrogance. It's something much more subtle. It's the ability not to react automatically to everything that happens around you. When someone provokes, criticizes, or tries to destabilize you, most people react impulsively, explaining, defending themselves, justifying themselves, or engaging in confrontation. But those who understand politics, guided by reality, not by ideals, as Machiavelli taught, understand that reacting impulsively often gives the other person exactly what they want: emotional control. Calculated indifference breaks this game. Imagine a common situation. Someone tries to provoke you in a meeting, expecting an angry reaction to destabilize you. If you respond calmly or simply ignore the provocation and remain focused on the objective, something curious happens. The person loses the psychological advantage. This small gesture demonstrates constant adaptability and inner control, two qualities that have always been associated with true leadership. Now consider how many pointless arguments arise from the need to prove something. Someone questions your decision, and immediately the impulse arises to explain everything in minute detail. However, often, over-explaining doesn't strengthen your position. It weakens it. When you excessively justify yourself, you communicate that you need the approval of others to validate your action. But the man who understands virtù and fortuna knows that some decisions are simply executed. He observes, evaluates, and acts with precision. Machiavelli described something similar when speaking about the calculated use of force. Not all force is noise. Sometimes, the greatest demonstration of power is not entering the emotional game that the other person has created. A practical example: someone criticizes your project provocatively. Instead of reacting immediately, you listen, pause, and respond only to what really matters, or in some cases, you decide not to respond at all. It seems simple, but few manage to do this because the ego demands an immediate reaction. And here's where something even more interesting emerges. Calculated indifference creates a powerful psychological effect on those around you. When someone expects a reaction and doesn't receive it, they begin to question their own strategies. The provocateur loses ground, the manipulator loses predictability, and the observer begins to perceive a different posture in you. This doesn't mean ignoring everything or becoming artificially distant. It means carefully choosing when to react and when to simply continue on your way. This type of posture creates a silent but striking presence, because in practice, most people are accustomed to impulsive interactions. When someone demonstrates consistent emotional control, something close to respect emerges, or even caution. And it is at this point that another element begins to appear naturally: strategic silence. There is a huge difference between the silence of insecurity and the silence of strength. The first is born from the fear of speaking. The second is born from the awareness that it is not necessary to react all the time. When Machiavelli analyzed the dynamics of power, he understood that those who talk too much usually reveal more than they should. Ideas, emotions, intentions, everything ends up exposed. Those who master silence create something much more powerful: space for interpretation. And the human mind hates emptiness. When someone doesn't explain everything, doesn't react to every provocation, and doesn't feel the need to justify every decision, people begin to project meanings. Some imagine confidence, others imagine strategy, and some even imagine power that may not have been there initially. This is part of politics guided by reality, not by ideals, understanding how perception shapes human behavior. Strategic silence is not the absence of communication. It is a much more sophisticated form of communication. Consider a common situation, a group discussion where everyone talks at once, trying to prove who is right. Now imagine someone who simply observes, listens attentively, and speaks only a few times. But when they do speak, everyone pays attention. Why? Because the scarcity of words increases the weight of the message. This is deeply connected to the concept of virtù and fortuna, inner mastery in the face of external circumstances. A leader who speaks every 5 minutes loses impact. A leader who carefully chooses when to speak transforms each intervention into something relevant. A practical example of this can be seen in negotiations. Great negotiators know that silence after a proposal creates psychological tension. The other party begins to talk more, explain more, sometimes even revealing strategic information without realizing it. Those who master silence understand the calculated use of force, not as aggression, but as control of the dynamics of the conversation. Another powerful effect of strategic silence is that it strengthens the perception of emotional stability. People who talk compulsively often seem anxious to fill the social space. Those who remain comfortable in silence demonstrate inner security. This communicates something very strong about decisions based on real human nature. Most people feel uncomfortable with silence and try to fill it quickly. When someone remains calm in this space, they begin to convey presence. And presence generates respect. It is not necessary to interrupt, justify, or defend every action. Sometimes just listening reveals more about others than any speech. This type of posture develops constant adaptability because it allows one to better understand the environment before acting. And when someone becomes comfortable in this silent territory, something even more interesting begins to emerge. An aura of unpredictability that leaves those around them unsure of exactly how to react. There's something curious about the human mind. It desperately tries to predict behavior. When we can anticipate exactly how someone will react, we feel in control. We know which buttons to push, which words to use, and which limits can be tested. That's why extremely predictable people end up losing influence without realizing it. If someone always reacts with anger, it's easy to provoke them. If they always seek approval, it's easy to manipulate them. But when someone develops constant adaptability, something changes in the dynamic. People stop knowing exactly how you're going to act. Machiavelli, observing leaders and rulers throughout history, understood that power often arises from this accurate reading of human nature. It's not about acting chaotically, but about not allowing others to have a complete map of your mind. This is part of a politics guided by reality, not by ideals, where overly predictable behavior becomes a strategic weakness. Consider an everyday situation. Imagine someone who always tries to please, responds immediately to messages, accepts any invitation, and agrees with everything. People quickly notice this pattern. Now imagine another person who maintains politeness and respect, but doesn't react automatically to everything. Sometimes they respond, sometimes they observe, sometimes they simply go their own way without explaining. This creates an interesting psychological phenomenon, curiosity. The human mind tries to decipher what it doesn't fully understand. This is a silent form of influence. Machiavelli observed something similar when he spoke of the importance of the appearance of virtue combined with the calculated use of force. Not fully revealing one's intentions creates room for interpretation, and interpretation breeds caution. A practical example of this appears frequently in professional environments. Those who react emotionally to every situation become easy to predict. Those who maintain a stable posture but are not entirely transparent in their reactions create almost instinctive respect. Another important point is that unpredictability doesn't mean instability. On the contrary, it stems from inner stability. Those who master virtù and fortuna know when to act, when to wait, and when to change their stance according to the context. This is directly linked to decisions based on real human nature. People respect those who demonstrate emotional control and autonomy. A simple example: someone makes a provocative comment expecting you to get angry. Instead, you respond with light humor or simply ignore it. The person loses control of the situation because their expectation was broken. This type of behavior completely changes how others interact with you. Some begin to observe more carefully, others avoid unnecessary confrontations, and some simply no longer know how to read you. And when someone ceases to be predictable, something begins to happen almost naturally. A type of presence emerges that no longer depends on the approval of others. A presence born from self-sufficiency. There is a quiet moment in a man's life when something changes inside. It's not a dramatic event, not a great visible achievement. It's a shift in inner posture. It's when he realizes he no longer needs to chase everyone's approval. He doesn't need to convince the world all the time, nor constantly prove his worth. This moment marks the beginning of emotional self-sufficiency. Machiavelli, observing leaders and strategists throughout history, understood that true authority is born from independence, from validation. Those who depend too much on the approval of others always end up molding their decisions to the moods of others. Those who develop inner autonomy begin to act based on decisions rooted in real human nature, not social expectations. This is one of the deepest forms of virtù and fortuna, acting with self-control even when the environment pressures you to conform. Observe how this manifests in everyday life. Think of someone who constantly tries to please everyone around them: colleagues, friends, family, social media. This person ends up living in constant external adaptation. Each environment demands a different version of them. Now imagine someone who maintains politeness and respect, but doesn't alter their essence to be accepted. This person may not please everyone, and curiously, that's exactly what generates respect. Because when someone demonstrates constant adaptability without losing their inner core, they transmit something rare: stability. Machiavelli said that power is often linked to perception, and the perception of someone self-sufficient creates a different aura. It's not arrogance nor social isolation. It's simply the absence of that invisible anxiety that makes so many men chase after acceptance. A practical example of this can be seen in professional environments. The professional who doesn't need to beg for recognition is usually perceived as more reliable and solid. And here's something interesting: when a man stops seeking approval, something almost paradoxical happens. People start paying more attention to him. This happens because the human mind values what isn't desperately trying to be accepted. It's the same principle that appears in various areas of life. An artist who creates out of conviction tends to attract more interest than one who tries to please everyone. A leader who makes firm decisions is usually more respected than one who consults everyone's opinion before acting. This is part of politics guided by reality, not by ideals. Machiavelli understood that authority often arises from the perception of independence. Those who demonstrate self-sufficiency transmit a silent message: I don't need everyone's approval to act. And this posture begins to build something even more powerful, an aura of power based on the perception that others form around them. One of the most intriguing ideas Machiavelli left for history is that power rarely arises solely from real force. It arises from the perception people build of you. In other words, before being something concrete, power is a psychological phenomenon. It's an aura that slowly forms when your posture, your decisions, and your way of acting communicate something specific to the environment. This is why Machiavelli insisted so much on the importance of the appearance of virtue. Not because virtue was false, but because people interpret the world much more by what they perceive than by what they actually know. In practice, this means that those who understand politics guided by reality, not by ideals, learn to manage their own strategic image. It's not about cheap manipulation, but about understanding how the human mind builds respect, caution, or admiration. Those who ignore this end are letting others define their reputation. Consider something curious. Many people believe that power resides solely in titles, money, or social standing. But in everyday life, we perceive something different. Have you ever entered a room and immediately noticed who seems to have authority there, even without knowing their position? This happens because the human brain reads subtle signals: posture, tone of voice, speech rhythm, level of emotional reaction. A man who remains calm in stressful situations conveys inner control. A man who doesn't need to explain every decision conveys confidence. This directly reflects the principle of virtu and fortuna, the ability to act firmly even when circumstances change. For example, in important negotiations, those who speak less and listen more generally seem to have more control of the situation. This happens because silence, posture, and response time create a perception of security, and perceived security translates into authority. Another essential point is that the perception of power often stems from consistency. A man who reacts impulsively one day and tries to demonstrate authority the next will hardly be taken seriously. True strategic presence arises when your actions demonstrate constant adaptability, but within a clear framework. You can be cordial but firm. You can listen but not bend easily. You can dialogue but maintain boundaries. This balance reflects decisions based on real human nature, something Machiavelli repeatedly observed when analyzing historical leaders. And when someone begins to build this presence over time, something interesting happens. People start to adjust their behavior around him. Some become more cautious, others show respect, and some even avoid unnecessary confrontations, because the perception of power is already established. And when this aura begins to form, an inevitable question arises: how to transform all this into concrete practice in everyday life. After understanding all these dynamics, approval, fear, silence, perception, the most important question arises: how to apply this to real life? Because knowledge without action is merely intellectual entertainment. And Machiavelli, in analyzing leadership and power throughout history, always focused on something very clear: practical results. It's no use understanding politics guided by reality, not by ideals, if you continue living exactly the same way as before. Change begins with small daily decisions. For example, stop explaining every choice you make. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or hostile, but abandoning the habit of constantly justifying your existence. Many people waste energy trying to convince others that they are right. But in practice, those who act with virtu and fortuna understand that some decisions are simply made. You choose, execute, and move on. Another important adjustment is to drastically reduce the urge to chase acceptance. This appears in simple everyday things. Stop immediately responding to every criticism, stop constantly seeking validation, and stop trying to please everyone at once. A practical example: imagine someone questions your decision. Instead of launching into a long, emotional explanation, you respond objectively or simply maintain your position. This type of posture demonstrates a calculated use of force, not as aggression, but as strategic firmness. Another powerful practice is to observe more and speak less. During conversations, meetings, or discussions, allow others to reveal their positions first. Those who master silence learn much more about their surroundings. This is part of making decisions based on real human nature because it allows you to understand motivations, interests, and intentions before acting. And perhaps the most profound change is developing an inner posture of self-sufficiency. When you stop begging for acceptance, something changes in your presence. Your tone of voice becomes firmer, your gaze more stable, and your decisions clearer. This creates a psychological effect around you. People perceive that you are not trying to please, you are simply acting. This posture requires constant adaptability because each situation demands a different interpretation. Sometimes it will be necessary to speak, other times just to observe. Sometimes to act firmly, other times to maintain strategic silence. The important thing is to understand that personal power does not come from speeches, but from consistent behavior. And when someone truly incorporates this posture into their daily life, they begin to experience something that Machiavelli observed repeatedly throughout history. When you stop begging for approval and start acting with intention, the world around you begins to react differently. Now think honestly. Now, how many times have you over-explained your decisions? How many times have you tried to convince someone to understand your choices, your path, your ideas? Most men spend their entire lives doing this without realizing it. They try to please, justify, prove they are right, and in the process end up surrendering something precious, their authority. Machiavelli deeply understood true human nature. He knew that respect rarely comes from those who beg for acceptance. It comes from those who act with virtù and fortuna, from those who understand that life demands constant adaptability and that decisions need to be made even when not everyone agrees. And when you stop living seeking approval, something silently begins to change in the way the world reacts to you. Now the question becomes personal. From today onward, will you continue explaining every step of your life to others? Or will you begin to act with more intention, more presence, and more strategic awareness? Because ultimately, every man needs to choose between two stances. The first is to live trying to be accepted by everyone, something that almost always leads to merely being tolerated. The second is to develop a firm stance, understand the calculated use of force, speak less, observe more, and act with clarity. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means understanding politics guided by reality, not by ideals, exactly as Machiavelli described. It means understanding that respect is born from consistent behavior, not from speeches. So I leave you with a thought-provoking question. At what points in your life have you been over-explaining? Where have you been seeking approval when you should simply be acting? And more importantly, what would change in your life if you started applying these principles today? Think about it carefully, because true personal development begins when you question your own patterns. And if this kind of knowledge resonates with you, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This way, you can continue learning about strategy, human behavior, and the principles that great thinkers like Machiavelli understood centuries ago, but that few have the courage to apply in the real world.